Good evening. This week's parsha is Parshas Ba'aleischa. One of the things that it discusses in Parshas Ba'aleischa is about the Korban Pesach. The Torah tells us that it was in the second year from the Jews going out of Egypt, and they made the Korban Pesach. And then we learn later in the parsha, we learn about that there were some that were impure, and therefore they couldn't bring the Korban Pesach, and therefore they asked Laman, why should we lose out? And they get Pesach Sheni. Rashi comments on this, that this part in the Torah about Korban Pesach is seemingly out of place. It really took place before the events, even in the beginning of Parshas Bamidbar, because the beginning of Parshas Bamidbar is the count of the Jewish people, which that was in the second month of the second year, which would be an Iyar, while this took place in Nisan, which is when you bring the Korban Pesach. So why did the Torah tell it to us out of order? So Rashi says it's to hide the shame. Was the shame of the Jewish people that this was the only Korban Pesach that they brought throughout the 39 years in the desert. They only brought once a Korban Pesach, meaning they brought once while they were still in Egypt, and then once in the desert. And to hide this fact, the Torah conceals it, puts it out of order. We don't know exactly when this took place, so it's not clear that this was the only time that they did it. But the question is why? Why is it a shameful fact that they only did it once? Seemingly the reason why they only did it once was because already in Shemais we learned that Hashem says when you're going to get to your boundaries, meaning when you're going to get to your promised land, when you're going to get to Israel, that's when you'll bring the Korban Pesach. Meaning you don't have to bring it all the time that you were in the desert. So what's so shameful about not having brought it? They're doing what they were supposed to do. They were told they don't have to bring it. But we know the answer from looking a little bit later in the Parsha, because we find when it comes to some Jews who are impure, they come and complain to God, why are we missing out? And Hashem says, you know what? I'm going to give you a Korban Pesach Sheni. And that teaches us, and should have taught the Jewish people, that while God said that they only have to bring the Korban Pesach when they get to Israel, but it's not inherently contingent upon them being in Israel, like we find with Truma and Meiser and various other mitzvahs. This mitzvah, while Hashem is saying you only obligated once to get to Israel, but it's not really contingent upon that. And if the Jews would have really pushed for it, like the Jews who were impure pushed for a second Pesach and they got it, if the Jews during the other 39 years would have pushed for it, they maybe also would have gotten permission to bring the Korban Pesach during their time in the desert. And that's what's shameful about it. And that's what the Torah is hiding. And therefore, the Torah starts off Parshas Bamidbar with counting the Jews, not telling us, even though that happened later, and not telling us about this event that happened earlier, which is to bring the Korban Pesach, the bringing of the Korban Pesach. But there's also a lesson there, that what event does the Torah start off Chumash Bamidbar with the counting of the Jews, which we explained in a previous class, that signifies the belovedness that and love that God has for the Jewish people. So despite the fact that the Jews didn't bring the Korban Pesach throughout the other 39 years in the desert, God still loves them and still counts them. And that's the vart for this week. Getting on to a short thing in Tanya. So we have been explaining the difference between something that is permitted and something that's usher, forbidden. And we explained the difference. Permitted is mutter, meaning it's untied, and usher means it's tied to klippa, to impurities. And mutter means it's untied. Now, the Alter Rebbe explains here, this is in chapter 8, that in truth, even something that is permitted, let's say you had it in a permissible fashion, but you had it with desire and so on, and you ended up using it out for something positive. Nevertheless, there is some residue, so to speak, from the desire, from the negative aspects of it. And therefore, when a person passes away, there would be a concept called chibut hakever, which is the angels banging on the caver, or the lifeless body, which is sort of a healing process to take off any residue that's left in the physicality of that he was into physical things. And then there's also another concept of someone's speech. It says, for example, someone who's able to learn Torah is supposed to learn Torah. Someone who's maybe not able to learn Torah, so it's fine if they're talking about other things as well. And they have their mind in other things as well. Nevertheless, there's another concept called kaf hakela. Kaf hakela is, to translate it, would basically be like a catapult. Or in other words, it's like a spoon. Kaf is a spoon. And that, you use a spoon, and if you have the soul is in the spoon, and then you use it to throw it from one end to the other, and it says there's two angels playing sort of ping pong with the soul. This is the soul after it passes away. What they're playing ping pong, it doesn't obviously literally mean ping pong, but it means that this, as it's explained in Sefer Ikarim, and then from Rabbi Yosef Elboy in the 14th century, that the soul, once it comes up on high, it comes into the higher worlds. So it realizes the greatness of God, spirituality, and so on. And when it's there, they sort of show it its thoughts that it had while it was in this world. And it goes back and forth. And by going back and forth, that itself is a cleansing process. But the Alter Rebbe also stresses that both of these things that we're talking about, the cleansing process, they're a cleansing process. That means they're not punishments for punishment's sake. And in fact, we find in the Torah itself, in Tanakh, Achan, who transgressed, and he's supposed to get karis, excision, and so on. But the pasuk clearly, Yeshua tells him that even though you're going to be, you have death, you have karis here, but you're going to have a portion of the world to come. Why? Because the purpose of punishments is just a cleansing process to clean the soul. It's like a laundromat. Once it's cleaned, it's able to go into Gan Eden. So it's the whole purpose of the punishment is not the punishment's sake, but it's that it should be able to go higher and travel higher and ultimately go into Gan Eden. At the same time, while we're discussing that even when you did something in a permissible way, there still may be some residue for having done it with all of your desires, and you maybe didn't have the true intention. The truth is, we find that Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, the redactor of the Mishnah, so the Gemara tells us something interesting. That on the one hand, it says that he was very, very rich, and he even had fruits and vegetables unseasonable. In other words, in the winter and the summer, he had from all seasons, meaning nowadays you obviously could go just into the supermarket, you could get everything. You could get watermelons in the middle of the winter too. But in those days, they didn't have refrigerators or planes, things to get it. So it was very, very expensive, very rare to have somebody that's able to have things not in their season. Nevertheless, he had everything on his table. At the same time, it says before his death, he pointed to heaven, his 10 fingers to heaven, and he said, I didn't have any benefit, enjoyment from this world. Meaning that even though he had everything, but everything he used out for the positive, to further his service to Hashem. So when we say that by using things not for a positive way, there's still a residue, even though it was something permitted, that doesn't mean that you have nothing, there's nothing from this world, no material foods, no materiality or anything. On the contrary, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi had everything, but he used it out for a positive way to serve Hashem. And that is the lesson for us, that we are not saying to refrain or to abstain from everything, but it's that when you're having it, have it for a positive purpose, a positive reason. And the same thing, the Alter Rebbe finishes off the parak, the same thing is when you're learning secular studies. So in a way, when you're learning something that's secular wisdom, in a way, it could be even more detrimental than you're learning or talking about something that have no substance to it, because it has no substance to it. So then it's completely worthless. It's completely air. but you're talking about secular wisdom, so it has something to it, so it can have a more of a negative effect. But at the same time, you can use it out for, if you're learning it, studying it for a positive reason, for livelihood, in order that you have a livelihood to serve Hashem, or it itself, you're learning, for example, astronomy or whatever it is, to have a better understanding of the Torah. So if you're learning it out for a positive, holy purpose, so then again, you're elevating it and you're not having a detrimental effect on your chachma, on your wisdom. Getting to the halacha, so this is something that nowadays has become more relevant. What happens if you are, for example, watching a live stream and somebody makes a bracha? Let's say I would make a bracha right now, and you're watching it live. Can you answer amen or not? Because we know that you're not supposed to answer amen if you didn't hear a bracha, or you heard it a minute ago. You don't answer amen now. It's called amen yisema, an orphaned amen, meaning an amen on nothing. You don't make an amen yisema. But let's say I'm making the bracha now, and you're watching it. It's pretty instantaneous. Can you make an amen or not? So the answer is like this. We find in the Gemara that it talks about the synagogue in Alexandria, the shul in Alexandria. It was so big that when they used to make the bracha, Chazal would make a bracha, somebody would wave a handkerchief, a cloth, and the people at the other end of the shul would know that now is the time to answer amen. Meaning, even though they didn't hear the blessing, by him waving it, they would know that now it's time to say amen. So from there we learn that even if you didn't actually hear the bracha, if you know that right now, not earlier, but right now, it's pretty instantaneous, more or less, you made the bracha, so you can answer amen. However, this is only with regards to answering amen, or Baruch Hu Baruch Shemai, but it's not with regards to fulfilling your obligation in whatever it is, hearing the Megillah or something else. For that, you actually have to hear the person, because we know now, even though right when it came out, electricity or microphones, there was this, or telephones, there was discussion that some held that maybe you would fulfill your obligation, but that was due to a lack of understanding of what's exactly going on a telephone. On a telephone or audio over the internet, it is not my voice that you hear. It's a digital replication of my voice. So it's not really me that you heard. It's digital replication, which through that you cannot fulfill your obligation. You can't answer amen because we said you don't really have to hear me to answer amen. You just have to know that I made a blessing. But to fulfill your obligation, that you really have to hear me. So to recap, that we said a short vart. That was the Torah tells us and stresses that they made a carbon Pesach in the second year, the first month that they went out of Egypt. And Rashi says that the reason why he's telling it us now, and here, not in order when it really happened before the beginning of Chumash Bamidbar, is because it's a shame. It's really something embarrassing. It's something shameful that this is the only time that they did it throughout their time in the desert. So we asked, why is that shameful? Seemingly they were told that they'll only bring it when they go into Israel. And we replied that it was shameful because just like by the carbon Pesach Sheni, it came because people insisted and they complained, why are they losing out? So too over here, if they would have complained, why are they losing out? Why do they have to wait until they go to Israel? Maybe God would have granted them permission, and that is shameful. Nevertheless, we start Chumash Bamidbar with counting the Jews because that is showing how beloved the Jews are to their Creator. And we brought from Tanya, we explained that even something that is mutter is not tied to impurities. Nevertheless, if it's done because of the desires, not for a positive purpose, even though you used it out later for a positive purpose, it can have a residue, so to speak, that needs to be cleaned up when the person passes away. It can be cleaned up before the person passes away also. But let's say it wasn't, it can be cleaned up later. And ultimately, we said any punishment is really just a cleanup process to go to Gan Eden. We explained that it doesn't mean that you have to abstain from everything, because even Rabbeinu HaKadosh, who had one of the most festive tables, everything even out of season. Nevertheless, he said before he passed away, he never had benefit from this world. Meaning not that he didn't eat these things. He did eat them. He ate much more than the regular person. But he used it out. He always used it out for the positive to help further his service to Hashem. And we said the same thing is with secular wisdom. That too, it should be used out. You learn it for a positive purpose. Positive purpose could be to have a livelihood, or it could be to further understand how the things work, to have a further understanding of the Torah, or to have a further understanding of God's greatness. But it's all for positive purpose in serving Hashem. And then we explained, we said a short halacha that if you hear Amen over the internet, over the phone, you hear somebody make a blessing over the internet or over the phone, you can answer Amen, because Amen doesn't have to be actually on what I said. It has to be that you know that I made a blessing at this particular time, just like in the shul in Alexandria. However, to fulfill the obligation, that you have to actually hear what I said. Not just know what I said, but actually hear what I said. And through an electronic device, you're not actually hearing what I said. You're just hearing a replication of what I said, of my voice. And for that, you do not fulfill your obligation for whatever blessing it is that it has to be made. Have a good night.